This week in 40K.
Welcome to This Week in 40K, your 1 hour update of everything you need to know from the last week, the show that's about the grimdark while being neither grim nor dark. As always, I'm Colin, and we don't have a Billy today. Instead, we've got the amazing and wonderful Tyler Bortel, host of Best in Faction, The Next Generation, the current kind of marquee show for the network. I think you guys get the best numbers, so that's awesome. Good morning, Tyler. How you doing?
Good morning, Colin. I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great. So Easter made this a very silly week for this show. There's not much to talk about. So what I thought would be fun is to get Tyler on, who always has opinions that sometimes they differ from mine. We'll get him on and we'll talk about the one tournament that we can cover. But we'll spend a lot of the episode talking about the 10th edition news, not only this week's, but previous weeks. Tyler is an incredibly dedicated competitive player. He plays all the time, tournaments nonstop, sometimes 4 tournaments in a week in consecutive weekends. Was that the record?
Yes, very different thing, but I did do that last year.
Yeah, which is, will you do that again?
We're getting close. I think I've got 3 lined up and a 4th is trying to happen in late May, early June. We'll see.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So Billy's not here because his baby is here, which is very exciting. So I think it's 3 days ago now. Him and his wife had their baby girl, Olivia, came into the world. She is healthy. Mom is healthy. Billy is probably healthy. But he is doing the new dad thing, which for those of you that have done the new dad thing, it's a lot. They hand you this baby at the hospital and they're like, here you go. And you're like, I don't know what to do with this. How do I keep this alive? So he and his wife are doing that. It is unclear at this point how long Billy will be on paternity leave from This Week in 40K. He thinks it's going to be weeks. I have been around babies. They don't do a lot. I think he'll be fine. But they kind of are on this pattern of eat, poop, sleep. And they don't really do anything other than those 3 things. So, anywho, big congrats to Billy and his lovely wife and also their pig, Lilu. Big congrats to all of them. I will share, without going too personal, Billy and his wife have been trying for a really long time to have a kid. So this is a blessing for them. And that's the word that he would use. So, Billy out, Tyler in. Let's talk about what's new. Oh, hold on, the button didn't work. Here we go.
What's new?
So there was some ho-hum news, and then we'll get to the fun news. The ho-hum news was they were like, hey, here's the Lions data sheet. And I'm like, you gave us all this information previously. And they're like, but he's coming out. And I'm like, well, yeah, I presumed he was coming out. So there wasn't a lot of news on that. My feedback from last week is still he's not durable enough for his points. He's neat other than that. I like that he can have 22 attacks. Any thoughts on the Lion, Tyler?
His Warlord trait seems like the most exciting thing about him to me. Because, yeah, he's a beat stick.
Remind everybody what that is, Tyler.
For his Warlord trait, and this has to be the worst worded thing that GW's put out in a minute, not an actual way that affects the game at all, just really stupid, which is that this activates during your opponent's movement phase. It's a command phase ability functionally, but it just happens at a weird time. Your opponent's going to be like, what am I doing? Oh, okay, I'm going to move there. Anyway, hey, stop. Right there. It's your move phase. I'm going to allow this. I'm going to give my buff out right now, just for some reason. But what the buff is it lets literally any Dark Angel unit, so it could be core character, vehicle, Astreus, what have you, allows them to have a 6-inch heroic intervention in the coming charge phase, which is like the only thing that Deathwing Terminators didn't have at the moment.
It's the only thing they didn't have.
Yeah, like something that I will do a lot when I'm trying to deal with Deathwing Terminators, particularly when there's banners or Stubborn Defiance around, is try to get as close to them as possible without actually having to interact with them. So because they're very slow and there's forests in the game and stuff, very often
they don't fly.
Yeah, they'll only cover like half an objective. So if you can charge a land speeder that's nearby or just move really fast, you can get right up and take that objective from them and do that pretty much with impunity, sacrifice a unit, slow them down, move block them, take an objective out from under them, what have you. If they've got the lion standing behind them and he taps them on their head after seeing what you've done in your movement phase, that is, of course, that's just not going to happen because a 6-inch heroic intervention is a ton of movement on a unit that is already pretty slow and needing it. So I think it's very cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, it is.
The rest of him is neat. Is he worth the points right now? Probably not. But I think that has a lot more to do with how nonsense Dark Angels are at the moment than anything else. If Dark Angels get
he's a unit of Terminators. He's 10 Terminators. That's how much he costs.
He really is. If 10 Terminators go back to costing a normal amount of points, we'll take another look at him. But until that happens, I don't think he's going to see the table.
It could be like when a really big man like me wants to do a pull-up and you have to go at it from both directions. You have to get stronger and thinner. It could be that that Terminators need to get more expensive and he needs to get cheaper. It could be a two-directional thing. I actually didn't realize that the Warlord trait is in the opponent's movement phase. That actually makes it significantly better, right? Because of exactly what you said. The Lion could be hanging out with multiple units of Terminators, and he could decide at that point which unit of Terminators should do it. I certainly think that's cool. Is it worth 350 points in that army? Probably not, but it is really cool. So, and his model's dope. I feel like every time we talk about him, we need to remind everybody that his model is super effing cool.
I think he is unequivocally the best Primarch model, and I count the Demon ones in that. For me personally, at least.
Yeah, he's really cool.
He feels like a Primarch in a way that the others haven't quite ended for me. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I've noticed, Tyler, over the last several kits, not even this year, but the last maybe 3 years, I've noticed that they're really figuring out how to put detail on a Marine without being boring. Yeah. And that was a problem they had for a long time. This is what power armor looks like. Okay, that's what power armor looks like. Can we make it a little bit different on different models? Because my big criticism of that model line is that everybody looks the same. And they're getting better and better about that. Like giving the Desolation Marines a large comical gun.
Yeah, they definitely don't look like the rest of them. I'll give them that. But yeah, they managed to do it without all this. Like Gilliman has this cartoonish level of trim and filigree just all over him, which I understand fits to some extent, but it looks a bit much and a bit silly. They've managed to keep the line looking streamlined and mean, but also very unique with a lot of additional detail fitting of a Primarch.
I think the funny thing about Bobby G is he's like, hey, I'm really hard to paint. Does everybody want me? Because I'm really hard to paint.
That he is.
Yeah, so, okay. Other than that, there wasn't really any 8th edition news. Or, excuse me, 9th edition news. I'm old. There really wasn't any 9th edition news. So, before we jump into 10th edition, let's talk about what's new this week for the network. So, on last Saturday, what do you guys do on TNG, Tyler?
We did not eat this week because we had some nonsense going on. So, our most recent episode was our episode on sportsmanship.
We talked about how great that is, and that has a lot of comments on YouTube. So that got a lot of attention from the community, which is great.
Yeah,
what are you guys doing? What do you guys have up next weekend?
Fingers crossed. We're meeting on Friday to talk about the balance data slate because it definitely drops before then. If it doesn't, we'll have to figure something else out entirely. But the plan is data slate coverage.
So you're really optimistic that the data slate is this week?
If it's not, I'm going to be real bummed. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. What do you think the data slate needs to have?
So it's to address a couple things at the top and honestly not that much at the bottom.
Actually, hold on, Tyler. Hold that thought. Let's talk about that in the what's winning section since it makes more sense. Yeah. So we could put in a hypothesizing the future section, but we don't have that one right now. Okay, so let's talk 10th edition. We'll talk about what's new, and then I want to hear Tyler's general thoughts on 10th edition. So there wasn't a lot new last week. They did talk about faction rules more. The idea that your rules are all a double-sided page, and the rules are on the data cards. And then they talked about about things like army rules. And they use as an example Oath of Moment. By the way, I think it's hilarious that GW comes up with these phrases like Machine Spirit and Oath of Moment, and then they're just like, we'll just keep using it for different things. Anytime the thing that it's being used for goes away, you have to assign it to something else. Back the Oath of Moment, this being called Oath of Moment gave me strong feels on that. But basically, it's the Space Marine trait, and you can reroll the hit roll. So in your command phase, you pick a thing. You say, I don't like that unit of 10 Emperor's Children Terminators. And your entire army gets to reroll hits and wounds against that this turn. What the hell is this, Tyler? They're like, hey, 10th edition is going to have less rerolls. By the way, this is what Space Marines do. I can't even make heads or tails out of that.
So my best case interpretation of this is two things. First of all, there's a whole lot less rerolls elsewhere going on. So this particular instance is a very, very exciting, very special thing that will make Marines feel like Marines. Marines have always been the rerolls faction, so it makes sense that if someone's going to get all the rerolls, it would be them. Yeah. Secondly, the other thing I would add is that this is the core Space Marines core rule that every single Space Marine army is going to have. So I assume it has been about as rigorously tested as anything else in the game.
You're funny.
So if it were ludicrously broken in the way that it looks like on paper it might be, I think they would figure it out by now. If it turns out that this is as crazy as it looks, I will have lost a lot of faith in the playtesting team.
It sounds like the data slate might have just dropped.
Not the data slate so much as I'm seeing a new thing on independent characters, but if it did, that would...
No, I don't see it. Someone in the comments was like, hey.
Yeah, they did just drop an article. Well, they dropped Dante's data sheet today, which is like Azrael's, very minimal changes. They gave him a beam pistol, whatever. But they did just put up an article specifying something about how model independent characters work, which they're now calling leading units.
And it sounds like they can attach themselves to squads like 7th edition. I'm skipping it right now. Sorry, everybody just came out while we're... Yeah. So you can take a Primaris Lieutenant because they need a way for you to need lots of them. And you can put it in you can basically attach it to like a Blade Guard unit or a Hellbluster unit. There are 2 redacted unit names here. So that's good news, Tyler, because there hasn't been a lot of new Space Marine data sheets over the last few years. Wait, no, that's not right at all.
Yeah. It is a fantastic lever that they have implemented there of saying, hey, this is what they can and can't join. So instead of saying, oh, by the way, we're going to introduce a new keyword to the entire game that prevents Centurions from getting buffs, we can simply remove Centurions from the list of units that our leaders can be, that any of the relevant leaders can be attached to. Easy peasy.
Do you think that I mean, not having read this entire article, do you think that all leaders will have to be attached and we won't have characters walking around unless they're like the Lion or Bobby G?
Well, it says they've replaced Lookout Sir with this mechanic.
Oh, all right.
So ostensibly, the old Lookout Sir rule has also been devolved into this new system. Your leader is kept safe by their bodyguards and can usually be targeted only when everyone else in the squad has breathed their last breath. And they put an asterisk there to explain that there are still snipers that can target things. So that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. They've made a lot of rule changes or data slate changes where I look at it and think, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. And this is that makes perfect sense. I don't actually like the Hero Hammer characters that are wandering around by themselves. Here's Karandris. He's going to wander by himself and come attack something and beat the crap out of it and then die. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
So maybe he'll still do that. I have no idea. But putting characters with units just seems like the way that Space Marines would also like operate.
Yeah, I think that it's going to also allow characters to be a lot less expensive and worth the points, because just being a character, having that keyword is so valuable right now that you really want them to do a lot of things. And suddenly a lot of these, especially the smaller support characters in an army like Genestealer Colts or Eldar, can suddenly cost very little and do very little and still show up on the table. Now, naturally, there will still be proper independent characters. They're calling them lone operatives nowadays, which just basically all have the no shooting outside of 12 kind of thing that like the Sanctus and Shadow Sun and things like that have. I
hope that Space Wolves have a bunch of those, because they seem like the army that should have lone operators.
Absolutely.
Angry wolf people wandering around doing things. So that's really neat, for sure. And let's talk a little bit more about what they've said. So Oath of Bowman is the Space Marine trait. Then they shared the Tyranid trait, which is at the beginning of the game, you get to pick one of three things. And what's really interesting about that is that's a lot like the way that Sisters are now. They have a trait that they pick at the beginning, just like Tyranids do.
It's a lot like the way Tyranids were supposed to be. Damn it.
Yeah, right?
Data Slate.
And so,
piss me off.
So this is an interesting thing that they've added. What do you think of this, Tyler? You're certainly, I mean, you know me, I'm a Tyranid player, but not to the degree you are.
It's great. This was like the best part of the Tyranid Codex, and they took it away from us, and it wasn't broken, and it still pisses me off. We'll talk about data slate stuff later, but it's the only thing I want back for NIDS. Nothing else matters. Give me this back. It's so much fun, and it's so Tyranids to be adapting something like that on the fly. Right. The rules they've chosen in particular, I think, sort of tell us a lot about the direction they're trying to push 10th, because the three rules they offer us are exploding sixes, which are now called sustained hits, sixes auto wound monsters and vehicles, which they're calling lethal hits, and precision, which is, I think, is targeting or getting specific models and units. And what that all spells to me is these are three different ways to really like get around core defensive mechanics quite directly. And I think that that you take that on one hand and you take the general like radical decrease in stats of offensive stats and increase of defensive stats on the other. And I imagine that what they're going for is a much more rock, paper, scissors approach to dealing damage. I think that the sort of plasma and similar spam that has been most of 9th edition, find the weapon that kills everything in the game, take a lot of it, it's really good, pissed a lot of people off, because when you have a unit that does that, it's just too good. You know, we think about like plasma inceptors, like Hive Guard back in the day, like grav cannons kind of do this right now. Mass Thunderhammers obviously do this. Just kills whatever it touches, regardless of whether it's like it's a unit, a big unit, or a small unit. So they're instead making most guns and melee weapons do very little damage, and instead having auto wounding and these new anti keyword mechanics do a lot of the heavy lifting, so that you have to bring anti-tank weapons to defeat tanks. And thus, if you play a lot of tanks and you take out the anti-tank weapons, your tanks are suddenly very durable, which is an interesting and exciting direction. I think that it's going to lead to a lot more diversity in what sort of stuff you have to take in a list, and is going to lead to much more balanced combined arms sort of approaches.
I agree with that. I'm worried. Yes, I think that's all right, spot on. My one kind of niche concern here is if they give Space Marines as a great example, or Guard, a tank that does both, and it's correctly appointed. Appointed would be different. It's cheaply undercosted. Then will people spam them because only some of your guns will be able to deal with it? And so does skewing your list screw people over more if the guns are more rock, paper, scissors? I don't like that. I actually don't like when someone's like, well, I took 9 Flyrants because you can't possibly kill Flyrants quick enough with any guns you have. Or Chucks, I only have taken infantry. So any gun you have that isn't infantry shooting is worthless. I don't think that that's a feel good in the game of 40K, but it does seem like they've enabled that more by the way data slates work. So
yeah, absolutely.
not data slates. Sorry, it's early in the morning.
Weapon profiles and stuff.
Yes,
Yeah,
weapon profiles work. Yeah.
There's a very I'm definitely fall into that Chuck camp a lot. I love a horde. I love saying I don't care about your 30 free melta guns. They might as well be 30 free bolters. But if it ends up being the case is that there are options that fit into that skew and have both kinds of weapons, that could definitely be very scary. It'll be up to GW to prevent that from happening. But I think I still will prefer that to, I have a gun that kills everything in the game. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation. We'll see how it develops.
And I was playing White Scars at the beginning of 9th. And everybody in White Scars is running 6 or 12 or 18 Plasma Inceptors. And the reason why is because they were a durable, fast-moving unit that could advance and shoot their guns, sure. But they also had, against any unit that had more than 5 models, they had 36 plasma shots because of blast. Because each guy had 6, right? I did the math right, I think. And sure, sometimes they killed themselves. That was a thing. But you can't have that, right? You can't have this unit that against tanks shoots this incredible amount of strength 8, AP 3 or 4, whatever it was. And then, but then against infantry gets a million shots. We talked on Best in Faction a week ago that we all think blast should just be gone. That the idea that there's a rule that's badly implemented to begin with, because like D3 blast, I look at it and think, that's better than D6 blast. It's not, but the guns that are D3 blast, like D cannons, are specifically designed to hit harder. And so if you give them blast 3, they get to be max shots more often. Whereas sometimes the blast 6 things are like blast 2d6 and the minimum 3 doesn't matter, right? So they've implemented this rule badly, and it also makes all guns work against everything, like Tyler's describing. So I just as soon see it gone.
Yeah, I would love. I understand where you're coming from on that, and sort of have the exact opposite perspective. I absolutely love blast. I think it's one of the best rules in the game. I agree that D3 and D6 have a little bit of a weird dichotomy there, which I think there's a couple different ways that you could implement fixes for it. But I think that saying simultaneously, hey, this gun is really good at killing hordes from a distance, and also the thing that hordes tend to do, whether they're shooting or melee, is sit in combat with your tanks. So, it actually is really bad against hordes if the horde player gets to do the thing. It gives a thing a lot of power and a lot of obvious counterplay, which I think is a really good combination. As long as things with blast don't get so much fly, fall back, and shoot, like simultaneously, that exact combo, I think that it's a rule that I'm always excited to play into. Every time I see a guard player take plasma cannon sponsons, I just get a little bit, a little overly excited. But it definitely has its drawbacks.
I think you're right, but however, I think that the second half of the rule, where blast guns can't shoot in combat, should just be handled a different way and should still exist. So I think blast should go away while keeping the part of blast that was good, which is, this is a blast gun. It's really a huge, amazing gun. It cannot shoot the things it's in combat with, unless it's guard, and it can shoot other things out of combat.
For sure.
Just turn that turret and shoot over the acolytes that are not actually doing any damage to your tank, and yet you can't drive away from easily.
No, you'd crush them. My gosh, it's humanity.
You can't hurt them. That's not okay. They're people, yeah. No. All right. Let's see what else is in here. We're going to skim it. You reuse vocab words. The Armor of Contempt Gladius Task Force is interesting. It's a stratagem for 1 CP that says when your opponent shoots at one of your units, you can reduce their armor penetration by 1, which is what Armor of Contempt did. But now this is what it does. And what I'm wondering is, they've talked about kind of specialty armies. Is this Gladius Task Force one of those? I don't think they say that in here.
Yes, it is because there are no other stratagems. When you are playing 10th edition, you will have access to exactly 18 stratagems.
Okay.
Roughly. there are going to be 12 core rulebook stratagems, which is a huge, I think there are 7 right now. So that's a huge uptick. We'll see what those actually look like. And you will have, I think it's probably around 6, but it might be as many as 8 or 10 from your detachment special army thing. And that is it. There won't be any that are generic to your faction. The only thing generic to your faction is the data sheets and the singular rule, such as Oath of Moment or Synapse, whatever that does for Tyranids.
Right, or a lot of units are going to have their special ability on the card and not need to spend CP.
Exactly. There will be tons of cool stuff that's still happening. It's just that none of it's in the stratagems. And I think that this design decision is the most exciting thing about 10th edition so far, because it takes all of the different overlapping rules and layering nonsense buffs and just throws it all out the window and says it's all entirely insular. There is no more forget about souping multiple factions. You're not allowed to soup multiple things within your own faction, not even sub factions. Just like you don't get to stack. These are the Drukhari rules, and this is the Cult of Strife rules. Like, oh, and you probably didn't think about what happens when I bring in this other relic from Covens that you weren't using. There's none of that anymore. If you're playing this army, these are the tools you have access to, and that's it. And we can tweak and modify this particular sub army, this formation, this task force, this whatever, without messing with anything else in the book, which is a really, really great eight way to mess with things. And because there are only so many rules, you can learn a new one really quickly, and you will know everything that your opponent can do by looking at that 2-page spread. And suddenly you don't find yourself needing to explain, oh, by the way, there's this stratagem that never comes up, so why would I mention it? But in this particular instance, there's none of that. It's done. Right.
I've got this really obscure thing that does something really neat, and if I explain to you what's so neat about it, then you'll know exactly how I'm going to use it. Is a thing that exists currently. Do you think... Yeah. So my read of this is that these special task forces are also how they'll address the difference in Marine chapters.
Yes, 100%. This is
and I think that's great. Yeah, and I think that's great. I don't like Space Marines having such a crazy set of rules. It's not even as crazy as Chaos is, right? Chaos is crazy confusing. How things go together. What special abilities do you get? Whose secondaries do you get? What stratagems do you get? What psychic power? Whatever the thing where they get arbitrary points that do things. They're blood tithe points or whatever. So I think that's all really interesting. The other thing I'm super hype about this, Tyler, is the part right after that says that relics and warlord traits are being replaced by enhancements. I hate the way that we build characters right now. Relics and warlord traits was one thing. Then Sisters of Battle was like, wait, hold on. What if I also could be the word of the Emperor or whatever? What is that? That's not a warlike trait or a relic. No, that's just a thing I do that's amazing. What? And so they've just added this additional way. When they did it for units, I was all on board, right? Here's an orc vehicle. If you want to spend 15 points, this is what that orc vehicle gains. Okay, sure. That's like a bulldozer blade. That's just an upgrade. But on these characters, I don't want to have to look 3 or 4. God forbid they have psychic powers or a litany. I don't want to look in 4 different places in the codex, which isn't going to be a thing anyways, to try to figure out what this character does. Just say, this is the list of upgrades. Give people upgrades, right? I think that's so much better.
Yeah. Naturally, it loses a little bit of push and pull, and that suddenly there's currently a balance of, I can't take both of these things because they're both in one bucket. They're both relics or they're both warlord traits. I can pick one of them, one of those. But I think that is absolutely worth sacrificing for the simplicity that you're talking about here. These are the enhancements. And I imagine there'll be one per character, which sounds way less complicated than every character having 4 different things.
I also want them to cost points and not CP. I have felt strongly about that for a long time. The way it's going. Yeah, I think that's just easier, to be perfectly honest. I think that trying to figure out how many CP you start with and your opponent starts with shouldn't be confusing and shouldn't be a really easy way to cheat, which it kind of is now. But points is a thing that is very clear, right? And it's also very easy, especially for new players, to weigh the opportunity cost, whereas for CP, it's way murky. right? How many
Yeah.
CP am I like? I've been with John Lennon or you or Alex in the Tyranid chat when you guys have been like, is 4 CP enough? Well, here are the specific stratagems I'm going to use and when I'm going to use them. That's not a thing most players can do, right?
Yeah.
So that's a thing that I'm pretty excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, General 10th. Optimism first, Tyler. What are you most hype about from 10th, other than what we just talked about?
I mean, optimism almost only. There's I think I have to admit my personal bias up front. I am most excited about a giant pile of new Tyranid kits. That is like something that I have been playing this game for a while. Obviously, not as long as a lot of other people, simply due to being on the younger side of things. But in the time that I have been alive, in the time that I've been playing Tyranids, which is like 8 years now, something like that. We have not gotten a squad. That hasn't been a thing. We've gotten like 2 monsters and 2 characters, and to be like, oh, by the way, here's new everything is the best Christmas ever. I'm very excited about that. So there's a lot of new models coming. That trailer was the most exciting thing I've seen in I don't know how long. And it's a good time to be a bug player. I'll tell you that much.
There's a lot of stale kits, right? I hadn't even thought about the Termagants being a stale kit because to me, they're a little gribbly. I've got 90 of them painted and based, right? Okay, done. Don't worry about that. And they're like, no, look how much cooler this one looks. And I'm like, damn it, you're right. That does look a lot cooler.
Yeah, I've got 300 of them on a shelf right over there. And I'm like, well, 300 more. Like there's no other way to do this. It's genuinely as crazy as when the Necron Warriors got updated. And we were like, wait a sec, we've been using clear plastic rods this whole time. Like this was an option. This is, okay. And hopefully, like with Necron Warriors, people don't want them nearly as much as they should for how cool the kit is, and I can pick them up on the cheap. But
yeah, I actually bought, when I came back to 40K, I bought several Tyranid armies from people that were getting into the hobby. And when we went to paint our Gene Stealers, there are 3 distinctive Gene Stealer kits, and all of them are old.
yes.
And so Stephanie looked at them and said, well, I hate these 2. I only like this one. And I ended up having to sell my extra Gene Stealers to someone and then buy new kits because Stephanie didn't like the older ones have a turtle shell in her defense.
Yeah, the ancient
and
ones.
And they're not tortoises, so that seems weird to me. Or turtles, I suppose. Clomp, clomp, not flap, flop is how I always say that. So yeah. New Tyranid kits, extremely exciting. I'm a Space Marine player. I have won several tournaments with Space Marines. I do not want more Space Marine kits. That is, to me, that is a waste of development resource. I understand that people buy them like crazy because they're Space Marines, but like, you gave Eldar some new kits, and they still have some egregiously old ones that people are using. Tyranids have an old model line that's not getting any attention, right? There's lots of that in the game. There's lots of chaos stuff that's 20 years old that's currently relevant. So, yeah, I think that it would be good to spread that design around a little bit, but I'm not going to get what I want because the nonstop parade of Space Marine models and rules will never stop.
And I will give GW some credit here. I appreciate them refreshing some old Space Marine stuff and not just creating 11 new Primaris kits. The new Terminators look fantastic. I'm very excited about them. The old Terminators look incredibly stupid. Sorry, I know everyone loves them. They look very silly. Their proportions are nonsense.
The new what?
And the proportions on the old Terminators, they're just nonsense. They look like they're very stubby. They're very nostalgic. And they've been getting better since the 80s, but they actually look cool now, and I'm very excited for that. The new Chaos.
I have a bunch of metal Deathwing Terminators from when I played before. It's the guys that are all standing like this, and they've got their hammer in one hand, and they've got their shield in the other, and they're just walking like. Then they're on a tiny base, and they're not very big, and it's just
little milk the cow pose going on. They're gonna do
great. Exactly. It's like wow. This is, and they're metal, of course. This is, and so because they're metal, you can't even kit bash them to give them a different pose. Really, Chuck could. Yeah. Chuck's a superhero. So yeah, I'm on board with new model kits for sure. I'm very excited. So we've both played Outward Realms, Michael Tempe's game, and I thought one of the easiest things about Outward Realms is that he's like, this is the base rules to the game. Everybody understand them? Yes. okay, here's the 6 cards you're playing with. And you have these cards, and they've got the rules on them. Marvel Crisis Protocol does the same thing. Here's the basic rules. You've got 6 superheroes in this game. Here's the 6 cards and what they do, and you also track what's happening with the units on these cards. I think that being able to hold the cards in my hand for the units that I'm playing, I am an incredibly active 40K player, and I regularly forget things. We talk about it in the Tyranids chat. Alex lost a high-end tournament game because he forgot a rule that Tyranids or Genestealer called half. I can't remember what the rule was now.
He forgot about paroxysm as a way to deny Overwatch when playing into John Lennon in the Tyranids mirror at top table at US Open Tacoma in July last year. It was very funny.
Which is hilarious, which is hysterical and insane. Yeah. But at the same time, Alex has got multiple editions and all of these rules in his head, and I too have lost a tournament game and then afterward been, damn it, right? So the idea that I can literally flip through my units whenever I want is great for learning, but there's also the, hey, what's the objective control value on this unit? Yeah, OC, and I can just be like 4, 3, 2, whatever, and I don't have to get out one of several books, flip into the book, realize I'm in the mother effing Crusade section, go past the Crusade section, start looking through the units. They're not alphabetized. They're by battlefield role. So I have to remember the battlefield role of the unit, which isn't usually bad, but it can be.
And heaven forbid it be a Space Marine Elite, and you're going to be in the 60 pages of those, just hoping to find it.
Yeah, and you're like aggressors, interceptors, incessors. So I think that is a really great change, so that when we come up to a table and I'm like, oh, hey, Tyler, I've never played Votann before or whatever, and you can be like, okay, here's the 2-page rule thing, give that a skim, and then here's the units I'm playing with, and 5 minutes later, I at least have a general understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cards, if the cards stick around, that's such an easy thing to get from your opponent, as opposed to saying, hey, can I look at your codex real quick and then do the flip, to be on the fly, like, hey, let me just see the cards real quick. Cool.
Oh, and only the ones you brought.
That's how that works. Yeah. That's all you need. And a lot of I think that to transition here into one of the other things I'm most excited about for 10th, I was about to say that currently there is not that much variety in the units that you're bringing in your army. Like, I'm playing into Dark Angels, I assume that I need the Deathwing Terminator datasheet, the Landspeeder Tornado, like 3 characters, and maybe Infiltrators, and then maybe the Landspeeder Vengeance. Like, that's all the data sheets. That's all of them in that
Black
army.
Knights
and then
and attack bikes. And attack bikes and Black Knights are the ones you forgot. But yes,
I would love to play against someone using any of those things.
Okay.
But whatever the case, it's a very short list of units that you're taking generally.
Yeah.
And when you're putting in some of those units, you're taking out some other units, which would make cards very easy. But they're trying to change that. And what I think is one of the coolest things that has flown under the radar is that all of these like pseudo stratagems that have been ported on to data sheets, they're all once per phase.
Yeah.
Right. So like the Termagants have this really cool ability where you move close to them and they reactively move. That's awesome. But once Termagant Unit A over here does that, Termagant Unit B cannot do that anymore.
Yep.
I am forfeiting the opportunity cost there, which I think is one of the best parts of stratagems as they exist right now, is where do I want to use it? And like stratagems, it is going to encourage you to have more of those abilities, which is going to mean taking more variety in units, because every redundant unit you buy is less useful than the first one, which is going to be super cool and very exciting, and hopefully means people dig a little bit deeper in the bag of solid units instead of what is the best unit, take 3 of, what is the second best unit, take 3 of, rinse and repeat until you're out of points.
Right.
That should be real exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. So, okay. What other thoughts about 10th?
I talked about how I really love the factions getting their own separate detachments and how that's a really good balance lever. I am really excited to see AP go down over the board and have everything be a lot less killy.
Yeah.
I think, like, you think about that stratagem we talked about, Armor of Contempt, and right now that's an okay stratagem. Like, Salamanders have that stratagem twice. They literally have it twice, and it's whatever. It's okay, I guess. But now you think about the fact that that is one of like a sixth of the stratagem Space Marines get access to, and you're like, oh wow, this must be really important. If they decided that that was so important that it would be one of their only like 6 or 8 stratagems, and then you look at the fact that a Chain Fist is AP 2, and yeah, -1 AP is a really, really big deal. Hopefully, Void Armor doesn't stick around. Hate Votan. So that means that things are going to be sticking around a lot longer than they have been in Ninth. I know that's been one of people's primary complaints about the edition is just how quickly everything can die.
Yeah.
So I think that if you're not bringing the exact right gun to deal with the exact right problem, you're going to have a lot of difficulty moving things. And the longer models stay on the board, the more interesting the later turns end up being. So I'm all for that as making the game always a 5-turn game instead of only sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's great, Tyler. I think that's very well put. The current situation is there's lots of kill units in the game for every army that kill anything they see or anything they touch, depending on the unit. And I hate that. And it's to the point where a lot of the time it doesn't make sense to roll your close combat, right? Oh, my blunder got into 5 acolytes. I guess we don't roll that. Right, but oh, my blunder, but it's worse than that. Oh, my blunder got into 6 aggressors. We don't need to roll that. Like what?
Yep.
So there's a lot of that in the game, and you're right. Especially if there's not good terrain and you go second, like you can lose things very quickly, and that doesn't mean you're going to lose, but it does mean that the game is going to be less interesting. And what I'm hoping is that units will be more generally good at shooting and close combat. And you'll end up with units that are shooting people and charging people rather than doing one or the other. Like Space Marines should have a knife. They are a 7-foot tall, like genetically engineered super soldier. They should have a knife. They should be able to go into combat and stab someone. Like that should be a thing. So I'm hoping that they think of that, and you can, because I think the game is really most interesting when you've got these resources that are skirmishing and moving around, and they're not dying immediately, and they're shooting things and they're killing things. And the other side of things not dying quickly is it's not as scary when an opponent unit gets close to you, right? So I just think that could make a much more nuanced and interesting game. I don't know if that's what we're going to get, but that's what they're saying. I would like to be the thing that we get is a less killy game.
It seems like it's the thing that they want, which is as good as we can get right now until we see.
Yes, exactly. Like. It is. I think that it is the biggest problem with 40K right now, is how killy it is. But if I had to rate, it would be hard for me to articulate why that's harder than the fact that you can't get new people into it because the game is such a mess rules-wise. Those are the two things, right? And by the game has good rules. What I mean is facts and data slates and multiple books, and like all of that has ended up being this mighty bloat that means that if someone, 3 years earlier in their 40K career from Tyler came to me and said, I want to get into competitive 40K, where do I start? I'd be like, like it's
really hope you have a really close friend who's really good at this and has a lot of free time.
And I hope that you have good reading comprehension skills, because sometimes, and I think that one thing we didn't talk about is universal special rules. Let's just give them a special shout out because they make all of that easier. Like if you know what precision hits are, your unit saying it has precision hits is a much easier cognitive process than reading a paragraph that could be written badly, could be written exactly differently from someone else who has the same rule. I talked about this on Best in Faction, that Marvel Crisis Protocol is really into throwing buildings and people, but different characters can throw a vehicle or a building or both. And so you have to read the tiny multiple sentence thing on every card and look carefully for whether it says interactive terrain feature or player. And I think 40K has that in spades. This idea that, oh, well, my rule says it this way, and your rule, oh, okay. Like redeploy. Can you redeploy out into the neutral zone? Can you redeploy after you know who goes first, right? There's all of this weird redeploy stuff. I
think you can see this especially heinously if you look at Dante's new data sheet. Because he has as this pistol. It's called a Perdition pistol. It's 9-inch range. It's pistol 1. It's strength 8 AP 4 D6 plus 2 damage. Sounds cool. And then it has this casual ability that is each time an attack is made with this weapon, if a hit is scored, draw a line between the closest point of this model's base or hull and that of the closest model in the target unit. Make one wound roll against the target unit, and each other unit that's line past for excluding units that were not eligible to be targeted by this weapon when targets were selected. Like, what are you kidding me?
Yeah. Why is it that many
Beam.
words?
Beam.
Yeah.
Like, half of the width of this data sheet is that special rule being in the ability section of this weapon.
Right.
And the fact that I have to double check whether your beam allows you to hit characters in the middle or not, like the Votan ones don't, but Morty does, I think, and this one doesn't. It's nonsense.
And that's a perfect example because you know who else has that rule is Eldar units.
Mm-hmm.
There are Eldar units. Avatar has that rule, and so does Fugan.
Yeah,
I think Fugan has it as well. So, but those are written differently for reasons. So I think Universal Special Rules helps with that a lot because, like Tyler said, it might say beam, and that might make it clear. Okay, let's move on to what's winning.
Oh, me, hopefully.
What's winning?
I don't want to be too specific, Tyler, but you're who's winning. Winning. And it occurs to me that we've talked a lot on the show lately about how player matters a lot. Maybe it shouldn't be called what's winning. Anywho, the same things are winning that have been winning for weeks. So rather than talking about that, Tyler, what would you like to see happen on the data slate?
Yeah. So the things that need to get hit from the top are things that everyone knows about. It's Space Marines, Gene Stealer Cult. And I say that tragically as a GSC player, but I probably have to agree. Like, if we want to pretend and that the numbers matter, then GSC has to get hit. Space Marines wise, I think we need to get doctrines fixed. I think pretty much everyone's on board with this. That like 75% of the Space Marine problem is sitting in Devastator Doctrine all game. It's part of what's wrong with Dark Angels. It's part of what's wrong with Desolators. It's part of what's wrong with. It's a lot of what's wrong with Iron Hands. We just go back. Like I've seen a lot of.
I think it's actually everything that's wrong with Iron Hands.
Yeah. Well, other than the Contemptor, which somehow has survived 11,000 balance patches over the course of 2 editions.
I was going to mention that when you were talking about character screening, that the characters have to cost more, especially if they have good guns, right?
Yes.
Because they're like, I'm standing here, my friends are behind this wall, but I promise they're keeping me safe. I'm not going to shoot these dreadnought guns at you. No, that's not okay.
At BS2 with exploding wounds. And, oh, by the way, if you could snipe me, it wouldn't matter. Because I've got a Tech Marine who will heal me for flat 4, and I'm, 9 wounds, 2 up armor, whatever. Get out of here. So I would love to see that stratagem, March of the Ancients, just.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a personal vendetta because, man, do I hate that dude? I kind of understand that if they fix a lot of other things, it's not the worst thing in the world. So, yeah, doctrines need to get fixed. I see a lot of people crying for Dark Angels to get nerfed down to baby transhuman. I think that's a ridiculous idea. I don't think they need that at all. I think that, unfortunately, I recognize that balance data sets don't change points in general. So we're not going to see Dark Angel points get boosted back up. And I'm not real. So what I think instead, as a more balanced way to do that, is I would move the transhuman to the same bucket as the OBSEC, where they lose it if you break the mono Deathwing bonus. And if you want to start taking all these land speeders, you're not transhuman anymore.
Man, that's going to make Deathwing armies so boring to play against, though.
Yes, it would, but it would also make them terrible. So I don't care. Okay. Or maybe you make it baby with the mix and the mono goes from 3s to 4s. You could see something touch there. The big thing is doctrines. Get doctrines fixed, and we can. It's also 100% what's wrong with Codex Warfare. Oh my gosh, that stratagem, that secondary is utter nonsense. I think if you fix doctrines, it's fine. A lot of people want to see more nerfs to it than that. I don't think it's necessary.
You know about the hilarious thing with Wolfen where they're worded so badly that they abuse that.
They act as if your entire army is an assault doctrine.
Yeah,
that's fine. Honestly, I was watching a game recently watching John Lennon play into some GSC on Tabletop Sim, and he picked up 14 points on Codex Warfare on turn 2. He killed 7 units with heavy weapons in a single shooting phase.
Yep. Also, secondary points for killing should just be gone. Like, that's not how the game should work, in my opinion. Because killing something gives you an opportunity cost that's huge. Like killing a thing stops that thing from doing things. It stops it from killing you. It stops it from holding objectives. One of the compliments that Chuck has given me a bunch of times is that I'm really good at looking at your army and saying, if I kill those two things, you won't be able to tilt me, right? We've talked about this, Tyler.
100%.
And so, and when I say tilt me, I don't mean me personally. I mean, you won't be able to tilt the table against me. And so I think that is it's an excellent point. That's what I would say, rather than rambling further.
For sure. So that's what needs to happen to Marines. That's the big thing.
My problem with that is I think that doctrine changes leave Dark Angels alone. I mean, yes, the bikes and stuff love being in Devastator doctrine, but Dark Angels are winning for the worst possible reason. I hate when an army wins because something is broken, and so you just take only that. And Terminators are the most boring example of that because they're slow and they're hard to kill. And so they're like, well, I brought this thing that you can't stop. Like, I don't care. Like, that's dumb. You should feel bad. You shouldn't feel bad. Play whatever broken army.
The bummer is that the only thing that I think is appropriate to do to them is mess with their points, because anything else I feel like ruins the feel of the army. Like, you could orc buggy Terminators and say, Terminators, Assault Terminators, Relic Terminators, you get one unit of any of those, and that's it. And that removes the Deathwing army from the game, which I think is really silly because that's like an iconic Dark Angel archetype. Exactly. You could go in and say they're not durable anymore, but like that's the thing that they do. So that'd be a massive bummer. What you want to do is say, hey, no, they don't cost 330 points. They cost 400 points.
Yes, that's exactly what you want to do.
But I don't think that GW is going to pull that lever for a data slate. So I don't think they're going to change points again in 9th. So.
A data slate that I believe is 2 months from 10th edition.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So if we literally don't get it, it's not the end of the world. Like we'll play this out for a little while longer.
John Indelicate, which is not his name, it's just what we call him on this show. He says, disagree. If the points are board positioning points, you get no interaction. I don't agree, because the points that you should get should be for going over to your opponent's side of the table. Like, you still have to kill people to keep them off objectives and stop them from killing you. Like, you still have to do that. But kill points, whenever they incorporate them, end up being more valuable as secondary points than other points. When you got kill more points, that was really bad. So anyways. So that's a little bit on the data slate. Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I think that there's room for some of the more secondaries that are meant to punish particular things. Like, oh, you brought a pile of tanks. Cool. All of my anti-infantry guns are useless now, but also I get a lot of points because you brought only tanks. I think that's a reasonable lever to pull on. But particularly, like GSC ambush is the thing. Kill things using your core mechanics. Get it out of here. It's not helpful. That's how you fix GSC, by the way. You remove all their secondaries from the game. I'd be fine with that.
Or just nerf them.
Tone them down. Yeah, tone them down. I think the army is fundamentally very beatable once people learn how to deal with it. But the points are just nonsense, so tone them way the hell down.
Yeah. All right, so I noticed now that we only have 7 minutes left, and we do have one tournament to talk about.
We should probably talk about it then.
So this is a 64-person event from Sweden, and it is run by Neil Kerr, who is a community hero, is how I would describe him. Have you met him? He's wonderfully nice.
I've spoken to him online a couple of times. He's a great dude.
Exactly. So 64-person, 6-round. This is WTC scoring, so it's 20-0 situation. And I'm going to go through the top 4 in 6 minutes. Olaf Svensson has won the event. What's that?
Hey, love him. Go Olaf.
Oh, okay. I don't know Olaf.
He's on the WTC team. I played him a couple times. He's great.
Okay. He was rocking Dark Angels, and I'm not going to talk about this list because it is literally 3 attack bikes and 20 Terminators and a command squad. Like, it's 2 Talamasters and Asriel, sure. The only thing I would point out here with Olaf's list that I'd love to learn about, if you want to ask him, Tyler, is why the Ravenwing Black Knights are in 2 different 5s. I'm pretty sure that they can combat squad. At least that's what I thought was the case when I was playing with them. I didn't ever do it, but I'm pretty sure they can. And so if you have them all together, you can give them Asriel's buff better. You can pregame move them better. You can Weapons of the Dark Age them better. I just think that's an interesting choice that maybe I'm wrong about. So that's interesting. Second place is Sebastian Larson. And Sebastian was rocking Baby Knights from the Chaos Space Marines. And he has 3 Brigands that with the heavy stubber. Then he's got 4 Executioners and 6 Stalkers. So only Baby Knights. This list is not new. We know about this. It is impressive for him to go 6-0 with it, Tyler, I think. Like, I think that Chaos Knights have some really awful bad matchups. He did go 5-1, actually. He only got 5 points against someone in the second round. Let me see if I can scan the really good players and see who has 15 in the second round. He might have lost to Iron Hands in the second round. I'm not sure. I don't have time to look it up, but that's what it would do like. And third place is Iron Hands, and that is played by Jonathan Slay Johnson.
JSJ.
So you know all the people now. Tyler.
He's the captain of. We play Sweden in a lot. He's the captain of their team, and he's hilarious. Love him.
Okay, great. So he's got a Iron Hand successor chapter with a Tech Marine and a Lieutenant. Weird, right? 2 units of Infiltrator, 10 Vanguard Vets, 2 units of Scouts. They do have 2 Storms to be inside of. That's one of my favorite tech pieces.
Yeah, 2 of them too. That's awesome.
2 Landspeeder Tornadoes, 2 units of 5 Devs in a drop pod, which I wish John Lennon was here to rage against drop pods. He rocked 1 multi-multi 3 Grav Cannon in those units, which I think is really interesting. I would love to be able to drill into that with him someday. 3 Eradicators, and then 2 units of Desolation Marines, because as we've talked about previously, they're now auto-include. And then Eirik
5, right?
Is what's that?
2x5 Desolation Marines, right?
What'd I say?
There's no way there's room for 20 in there, right? You just said 2 units. I was asking how big they were.
Oh, yeah, they're 2x5. Yeah.
2x5? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Eirik was rocking Yimmer from the Votan, and he's got a Forge Master and a Call and 10 Warriors, 8 of the weird Terminator guys that are overcosted, but really cool. 3 units of 3 Pioneers, 2 of the little tanks, and then 2 big tanks. And my question in the last few minutes here is why does Votan occasionally win? Like when I play against Votan, my opinion has been that they ruined this army with nerfs. But once a week, every weekend, there is one Chad, one stud, one amazing person who gets in the top 4 with Votan at a largish tournament. And you just did a big episode on Votan, Tyler. So what's your thoughts about why occasionally they wreck and the rest of the time we don't see them?
Votan are the army that is best at tabling you in the game right now, other than maybe Iron Hands. But it's their first, second, and only plan. If you are bringing a bunch of big hulking running around things like Dark Angel Terminators or Chaos Knights, they will absolutely kill everything that there is to kill. They also do incredibly well on low terrain environments. We saw Votan do exceptionally well at Adepticon, and I don't think that their terrain format had nothing to do with that. They're really good at shooting people really, really hard. Okay. So if you happen to run through a win path that involves a lot of matchups where you can win by shooting people really, really hard, especially if they give up kill secondaries, you're going to win a lot of games. But the moment you run into someone who shoot them really, really hard in the face isn't an effective strategy, you're completely out of luck, and there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah, I've played my hybrid Dark Angel, Deathwing, and Ravenwing list into Votan twice, both times with experienced Votan players at the helm. And both times it was like, oh, well, you didn't kill me enough, so now you're dead. Yeah. Right? Like we start and there's a timer, not a turn timer, like a timer that says, you better kill the Dark Angels quickly. Yeah. And they didn't do that. So, okay.
I should comment also, that's a wild Votan list. It has no melee. There's not a single...
Oh, they often don't have melee, Tyler. That's one of the things that blows me away. And people love the Terminators, which I would say are way too expensive.
They have the value in that they're one of the only things that can really operate at range and can bully and threaten in that way. And they're one of the things that's like can actually stand somewhere durably with multiple models. I don't personally think that they would be in my Votan list, but I don't necessarily think that you're wrong for
it must feel terrible to be twice the cost of a Deathwing Terminator.
Yeah.
That must feel really bad for the dwarves. But I'm half the size. Shouldn't I be half the points? So, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for Tyler. I thought we weren't going to have enough to talk about for an hour, and that was a hoot.
Mm-hmm.
Really fun. Better Human, Better Gamer is tomorrow night at 5 o'clock Pacific. Remember, you can join that live or get it on our podcast or YouTube feed like always. TNG is going to be next weekend. Biff Pod's also going to be next weekend. I hope we also get to talk about the data slate. So we'll see. And that is us for this week. Thank you, everybody. Remember to like and subscribe us basically wherever you see our name. It matters. Facebook, YouTube, your podcast app of whatever it is. All of that matters. So thank you, everybody, that's not Better Human, Better Gamer. For This Week in 40K, he's Tyler, and I'm Colin because someone has to be, and we'll be back at you guys next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.